The fall of Tenochtitlan, a clash of civilizations. In the fading light of a November evening in 1519, Hernán Cortés stood transfixed at the edge of a mountain pass, gazing upon what must have seemed like an impossible vision. There, rising from the waters of Lake Texcoco like some fevered dream, lay Tenochtitlan, an island city of gleaming pyramids, floating gardens and interconnected causeways that dwarfed any European capital of its time. What the Spanish conquistador couldn't know in that moment was that within 2 years, this magnificent metropolis of 250,000 souls would lie in ruins, and the course of human history would be forever altered by what was perhaps the most audacious military conquest ever attempted: the overthrow of an empire by a band of just 508 Spanish adventurers and their indigenous allies. This is not merely a tale of conquest, but an epic clash of civilizations where reality proved stranger than any fiction. At its heart stands the enigmatic figure of Cortés himself, a failed law student turned conquistador who combined Machiavellian cunning with unstoppable determination, and his extraordinary relationship with the doomed Emperor Montezuma, whose mixture of hospitality and hesitation would prove fatal to both himself and his empire. Their story, pieced together from accounts written by both the conquerors and the conquered, remains one of history's most remarkable examples of how courage, treachery, timing, and sheer luck can change the world in ways that echo across centuries. A rebel's ambition, Hernán Cortés and the path to conquest. On a sweltering summer morning in 1504, a scrawny 19-year-old Hernán Cortés stumbled off a merchant ship onto the docks of Hispaniola, clutching little more than a sword he barely knew how to use and a head full of romantic notions about glory in the New World. The son of an impoverished noble family from Medellin, Spain, he had just abandoned his legal studies at the University of Salamanca, much to his parents' dismay, in pursuit of the siren call of adventure that was luring young men across the Atlantic. What distinguished young Cortés from the hordes of other adventure seekers was not his martial prowess or his noble bearing, but rather his razor-sharp political instincts and an almost supernatural ability to read and manipulate those around him. These skills served him well in the cutthroat world of colonial politics. Within a few years, he had caught the eye of Diego Velázquez, the ambitious governor of Cuba, who saw in the young man a useful combination of literacy, charm, and ruthlessness. Cortés served as Velázquez's personal secretary and notary, roles that taught him the intricacies of colonial administration and the art of official documentation, knowledge that would later prove crucial. By 1511, he had already participated in the brutal conquest of Cuba, where he received his first real military experience, and more importantly, his first taste of both command and wealth in the form of an encomienda, a grant of land and Indian laborers. But Cortés was haunted by rumors of a vast empire to the west, where gold was said to be as common as clay. When reports arrived of Juan de Grijalva's 1518 expedition to the Mexican coast, Cortés saw his opportunity. Governor Velázquez, impressed by Grijalva's reports of gold-rich civilizations, began planning a larger expedition. In a masterful display of political maneuvering, Cortés convinced Velázquez to name him commander of this new fleet. He then embarked on a frenzied campaign of recruitment and preparation, leveraging every connection and mortgaging everything he owned to outfit his expedition. The relationship between Cortés and Velázquez soon soured as the governor began to suspect his ambitious subordinate might not be content to simply explore and trade. But Cortés had anticipated this. On the night of February 18th, 1519, when word reached him that Velázquez was about to revoke his commission, Cortés made the decision that would define the rest of his life. In the dead of night, he ordered his 11 ships to set sail from Santiago de Cuba, departing without full authorization and effectively turning himself into a rebel against Spanish authority. It was an act of breathtaking audacity. He was now legally a traitor, and his only hope for redemption lay in achieving something so momentous that the Spanish crown would have no choice but to pardon him. As his small fleet disappeared into the darkness, bound for the mysterious coasts of Mexico, Cortés had no way of knowing that he was sailing toward one of history's most pivotal confrontations. But he had already demonstrated the qualities that would define his conquest: ruthless ambition, political genius, and an absolute willingness to burn his bridges and risk everything on a single desperate gamble. The die was cast, and the fate of two civilizations hung in the balance. The First Contact and Conquest of Mexico. The island of Cozumel loomed before Cortés's fleet in February 1519, its white beaches masking the first stroke of fortune that would shape his conquest. Here, he discovered Geronimo de Aguilar, a shipwrecked Spanish priest who had spent 8 years living among the Maya. Aguilar's fluency in Mayan would prove crucial, but an even greater piece of luck awaited on the mainland. A gift of 20 slave women from the defeated Chontal Maya included a remarkable young woman known to history as La Malinche, or Doña Marina to the Spanish. Through her knowledge of both Nahuatl and Mayan languages, coupled with Aguilar's Spanish-Maya translation, Cortés gained something more valuable than gold: the ability to navigate the complex political landscape of ancient Mexico. The first test of Spanish arms came at the Battle of Cintla, where Cortés faced thousands of Tabasco warriors in the swampy lowlands. The conquistadors were outnumbered 30-1, but their steel swords cut through cotton armor like paper, while local weapons barely dented Spanish plate armor. The decisive moment came when Cortés unleashed his secret weapon, 16 horses, creatures never before seen in the Americas. The sight of armored men merged with these unknown beasts sent waves of terror through the indigenous ranks. The psychological impact of this victory rippled far beyond the battlefield, as news of the strange, invincible warriors spread rapidly toward the Aztec capital. Cortés's political genius revealed itself in his next move. Landing on the Mexican coast, he orchestrated what amounted to a legal coup. Knowing that his expedition lacked royal authorization, he established the town of Villarica de la Vera Cruz, resigned his commission from Velázquez, and had the newly created town council appoint him as representative of the Spanish crown. In one brilliant stroke, he had created a veneer of legitimacy for his rebellion. To ensure his men's loyalty, he took an even more dramatic step. He ordered his ships scuttled, secretly having them run aground and stripped of all useful materials. The message was clear: there would be no turning back. Through La Malinche, Cortés soon learned of deep resentment among the coastal peoples toward Aztec rule. The Totonacs of Chempoala, suffering under heavy Aztec tribute demands, provided his first crucial alliance. When Aztec tax collectors arrived in Chempoala, Cortés made an audacious gamble. He had them arrested, then secretly released 2 of them with a message for Montezuma, playing both sides with masterful duplicity. This bold move demonstrated to the Totonacs that the mighty Aztec Empire could be defied, while simultaneously opening diplomatic channels with Tenochtitlan. The brutality of the conquest revealed itself at Tlaxcala, where Cortés faced his most serious military challenge yet. The fiercely independent Tlaxcalans, traditional enemies of the Aztecs, tested the Spanish force with weeks of intense combat. Yet after bloody battles that nearly ended the expedition, Cortés turned these passionate enemies into his most vital allies, demonstrating his genius for exploiting political divisions. The Tlaxcalan alliance would provide him with thousands of warriors, without whom the conquest of Tenochtitlan would have been impossible. Yet amid these triumphs, a dark harbinger of things to come appeared in Cortés's ranks, an outbreak of smallpox among his men. None could have guessed that this disease would prove more devastating to the peoples of Mexico than any weapon of steel or gunpowder. As the Spanish Tlaxcalan army marched toward the great city of Cholula, they were unknowingly carrying not just the seeds of military conquest, but of biological devastation that would reshape the Americas forever. The march inland, Cortés and the collision of worlds. Cholula rose before the conquistadors like a vision from ancient dreams, the second largest city in Mexico, dominated by the largest pyramid ever built in the Americas, its golden shrine to Quetzalcoatl glinting in the autumn sun. But beneath the city's religious veneer, Cortés's indigenous allies warned of treachery. Through La Malinche's intelligence network, he learned of a plot. The Aztecs had supposedly arranged for the Spanish force to be ambushed within the city's narrow streets. Whether this threat was real or merely perceived, Cortés's response would shock even his hardened soldiers and forever stain his legacy. Gathering Cholula's nobles and priests in the main square, Cortés sprung a trap of his own. At his signal, Spanish guns and crossbows unleashed devastation, while Tlaxcalan warriors, eager to settle old scores, poured into the city. The massacre lasted 2 days. When the killing finally stopped, thousands lay dead, and the great religious center of Cholula would never recover its former glory. The message to other cities was clear: resistance meant annihilation. As the army pushed toward the Valley of Mexico, they encountered increasingly desperate attempts by Montezuma to dissuade their advance. The Aztec Emperor sent lavish gifts of gold, perhaps not realizing that such displays of wealth only inflamed Spanish greed. His ambassadors warned of the treacherous mountain passes and the dangers that awaited them, which Cortés dismissed with characteristic bravado. Spaniards know no fear. We were born to fight and die. The march over the mountains between the volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl tested this boast. At 13,000 feet above sea level, men and horses struggled to breathe in the thin air while trudging through snow and volcanic ash. Several indigenous allies, unused to such cold, died of exposure. Yet Cortés drove them on, knowing that these passes were the gateway to his destiny. Local guides suggested easier routes, but the conquistadors suspected a trap, instead choosing the most difficult path precisely because it would be the least guarded. The rigors of the march were forgotten on November 8, 1519, when the army crested the final pass. There, spread below them in the crystalline mountain air, lay the Valley of Mexico. The sight stopped even the most hardened veterans in their tracks. In the center of a vast lake system glittered Tenochtitlan, a city of impossible grandeur, massive pyramids, gleaming white plazas, and floating gardens all connected by great causeways. The Spanish chronicler Bernal Díaz del Castillo would later write, "When we saw so many cities and villages built in the water and other great towns on dry land, we were amazed and said it was like the enchantments they tell of in the legend of Amadis." But it was what awaited them at the end of the causeway that would test Cortés's nerve like nothing before. As they approached the city, they saw a glittering procession emerging to meet them. At its head was Montezuma himself, carried on a golden litter, wearing robes adorned with precious stones. The moment these two men would meet, the ambitious conquistador and the supreme ruler of the Aztecs would set in motion events that would reshape the Western Hemisphere. As Cortés dismounted his horse and Montezuma stepped down from his litter, two worlds that had developed in isolation for millennia were about to collide with devastating consequences. The clash of cultures, Cortés and Montezuma in Tenochtitlan. The first meeting between Cortés and Montezuma crackled with tension and misunderstanding. As the conquistador moved to embrace the emperor, a common European greeting, Montezuma's guards stepped forward in alarm. The emperor had never been touched by another human being. Even looking directly at his face was punishable by death. Yet here was this bearded stranger walking straight toward him as an equal. Through La Malinche's translation, they exchanged formal greetings laden with double meanings. Montezuma's welcoming speech, recorded by Spanish chroniclers, carried undertones that would be debated by historians for centuries. "We have known that you would come, to sit on your throne, to come to your land." Tenochtitlan's splendor exceeded anything the Spanish had imagined. A city of 250,000 people built on an island, connected to the mainland by 3 massive causeways, each wide enough for 8 horsemen to ride abreast. The great market at Tlatelolco stunned even veterans of Europe's grandest cities. Spanish soldiers described seeing 60,000 traders daily, dealing in everything from gold dust to slaves, from exotic feathers to chocolate. The market had its own courts of law, and judges patrolled the aisles ensuring fair trade. At night, the marketplace was lit by great braziers whose light reflected off the lake waters, creating an ethereal glow that reminded many Spaniards of Venice, if Venice had been built by gods. But beneath the wonder lay horror. The Great Pyramid at the city's heart rose in 4 tiers to 150 feet, crowned by 2 temples, one to Tlaloc, god of rain, the other to Huitzilopochtli, god of war. The Spanish were escorted to the summit, where they found walls and floors black with dried blood from sacrificial victims. Beside the temple stood the Tzompantli, a massive rack displaying thousands of human skulls from sacrificial victims. Bernal Diaz wrote that he counted 136,000 skulls, though modern historians suggest this number was exaggerated. The message was clear. This was a civilization that combined highest sophistication with practices that shocked even the hardened conquistadors. Montezuma housed the Spanish in the palace of his father, Axayacatl, treating them with lavish hospitality while keeping them under constant surveillance. Cortés found himself in a precarious position. His tiny force was now in the heart of a powerful empire, surrounded by thousands of warriors. The conquistador turned this vulnerability into his greatest gamble yet. Using reports of an attack on the Spanish garrison at Veracruz as pretext, Cortés did the unthinkable. He took Montezuma hostage in his own palace. In a display of psychological warfare that would be studied for centuries, he convinced the most powerful man in Mesoamerica to become a prisoner in his own city, all while maintaining the fiction that the emperor remained in power. For 6 months, a bizarre routine developed. Montezuma continued to govern through his councils, but now did so under Spanish supervision. He played dice with his captors and even went hunting with them outside the city, though always under guard. The Aztec nobility, paralyzed by religious omens and political uncertainty, watched as their emperor seemed to surrender his empire without a fight. Spanish soldiers roamed the city freely, marveling at its wonders while methodically mapping its defenses. They climbed the Great Pyramid, planted a cross in the temple, and even held Christian services next to the Aztec gods. The powder keg of cultural collision needed only a spark to explode. That spark would come from an unexpected direction. As Cortés was forced to leave the city to confront a new Spanish force sent by Governor Velázquez to arrest him, he left behind a man whose actions would shatter this delicate balance and plunge Tenochtitlan into chaos. The great city of dreams was about to become a nightmare. Blood in the temple, the turning point in the conquest of Tenochtitlan. Pedro de Alvarado was everything Cortés was not, impetuous, brutal, and lacking any sense of diplomatic subtlety. Left in command while Cortés marched to confront Pánfilo de Narváez's rival expedition, Alvarado made a decision that would prove catastrophic. During the festival of Toxcatl, as thousands of unarmed Aztec nobles performed sacred dances in the great temple courtyard, Alvarado became convinced, or claimed to be convinced, that the ceremony was a pretext for uprising. His response was swift and merciless. The massacre began without warning. Spanish soldiers sealed the temple courtyard exits and attacked the celebrating nobles, weighted down by their ceremonial ornaments and feathers. The stones of the sacred precinct ran red with the blood of the Aztec elite, priests, warriors, and nobles who had been dancing in honor of their gods moments before. Those who attempted to scale the walls were cut down by crossbow fire. When word of the slaughter reached the city's populace, the response was immediate and furious. The simmering tensions of months exploded into open warfare. Cortés, having brilliantly co-opted Narvaez's force through a mixture of bribery and surprise attack, returned to find his carefully constructed political balance destroyed. The city was in full revolt, the Spanish were under siege in Axayacatl's palace, and the bridges on the causeways had been removed. In a desperate attempt to restore order, Cortés forced Montezuma to appear on a palace balcony to calm his people. The response shocked everyone present. The crowd attacked their own emperor with stones and arrows. Whether Montezuma died from these wounds or was later killed by the Spanish remains one of history's enduring mysteries, but the effect was the same. The last thread of legitimacy holding the conquest together had snapped. What followed was one of military history's most desperate retreats. On the night of June 30th, 1520, La Noche. Triste, the sad night, Cortés attempted to sneak his forces out of the city under cover of darkness. But the Aztecs were waiting. As the Spanish and their allies tried to cross the broken causeways on a portable bridge, war drums thundered from the great temple. Thousands of Aztec warriors attacked from canoes and the causeway itself. The night air filled with the whistle of darts and arrows, the screams of the dying, and the splash of men and horses falling into the lake. The Spanish took horrific casualties. The causeway became so choked with dead humans, horses, and indigenous allies that survivors described walking over bridges of corpses. Most of the gold they had tried to carry out was lost in the lake, weighing down soldiers who drowned in their armor. The morning light revealed the full extent of the disaster. Cortés had lost more than 800 Spanish soldiers, thousands of indigenous allies, most of his horses, and all of his artillery. The survivors regrouped at Tacuba, where, according to multiple accounts, Cortés sat beneath a great cypress tree and wept as he watched his dream of conquest seemingly die with his men. But even in this moment of utter defeat, the conquistadors' indomitable will remained unbroken. When one of his captains asked him what their next move should be, Cortés's response revealed the steel at his core. "Let us rebuild. Let us go forward. The gods have spared us to complete this conquest." As his battered force limped toward friendly Tlaxcala territory, he was already planning how to turn this catastrophic defeat into ultimate victory. Behind them, Tenochtitlan erupted in celebration, the Great Pyramid blazing with victory fires that illuminated the lake. The Aztecs had no way of knowing that their triumph would be short-lived or that the worst was yet to come. A new emperor was about to rise, one who would lead them in their final desperate stand against the returning conquistadors. The Siege of Tenochtitlan, a battle for Mesoamerica. While Tenochtitlan celebrated its liberation, Cortés undertook the most impressive feat of his career, rebuilding an army from the ashes of defeat. His force had been shattered, but his reputation for success and promises of revenge-won riches drew hundreds of Spanish reinforcements from Cuba and Spain. More crucially, his diplomatic genius convinced even more indigenous allies to join his cause. The Tlaxcalans, despite seeing the Spanish defeat firsthand, doubled down on their alliance. Their decision was aided by a devastating outbreak of smallpox that ravaged the Aztec capital, while largely sparing their Spanish-allied cities, an epidemic that many interpreted as divine favor for the conquistadors. In Tenochtitlan, a new leader had emerged. Cuauhtémoc, Montezuma's nephew, took control at just 25 years old. Unlike his uncle, he harbored no illusions about coexistence with the Spanish. Young, fierce, and tactically brilliant, he began preparing the city for the siege he knew would come. Under his command, the Aztecs deepened canals, fortified causeways, and assembled thousands of canoes for naval warfare. Cuauhtémoc also sent diplomats to other cities, warning them that Spanish promises of liberation were merely a pretext for enslavement. Cortés' tactical response was revolutionary. Understanding that control of Lake Texcoco was crucial, he ordered the construction of 13 brigantines, small warships that could outmaneuver Aztec canoes. In one of the conquest's most remarkable logistical feats, he had the ships built in pieces in Tlaxcala, then carried over the mountains by thousands of porters. These vessels would turn the lake, once Tenochtitlan's greatest defense, into a fatal vulnerability. The siege began in May 1521, with Cortés commanding the most formidable army ever assembled in the Americas: 918 Spanish soldiers, 84 horsemen, dozens of cannons, and over 75,000 indigenous allies. He split his forces into 3 camps, each targeting a major causeway while the brigantines patrolled the lake, cutting off all supplies to the island city. But Cuauhtémoc's defense was brilliant. The Aztecs used their superior numbers to launch devastating night raids, rebuilt destroyed bridges with remarkable speed, and used floating gardens as stealthy transport routes. In one particularly daring counterattack, Aztec forces nearly captured Cortés himself. During a major assault on the causeway, they lured the Spanish into a trap by feigning retreat. Cortés was knocked into the lake, and Aztec warriors were dragging him toward a canoe for sacrifice when his men fought through the melee to rescue him. That night, the great temple's fires blazed with the sacrifices of captured Spaniards and their allies, their hearts torn out in sight of the besieging army. But time and technology favored the conquistadors. The brigantines proved devastating, their mounted artillery tearing through swarms of canoes while maintaining a stranglehold on supplies. Even more lethal was the smallpox epidemic, which killed thousands of defenders, including many of Cuauhtémoc's most experienced warriors. The Aztecs fought with incredible tenacity, at one point sacrificing 40 Spaniards and hundreds of allies in a single day to boost morale. But they were being worn down by disease, hunger, and the relentless Spanish artillery. As summer wore on, the siege turned into one of history's most gruesome battles of attrition. The lake waters turned black with decay, drinking water became contaminated, and food supplies dwindled to the point where the defenders were eating leather and lime mortar to survive. Yet still, Cuauhtémoc refused to surrender, embodying the Aztec warrior ideal of fighting to the last man. The stage was set for a final apocalyptic confrontation that would determine the fate of Mesoamerica. The last days of the Aztec world. By August 1521, Tenochtitlan had become a charnel house. Block by block, the Spanish-led coalition pushed deeper into the city, their artillery turning ancient temples into rubble. The Aztec defenders fought for every inch, transforming each street into a killing ground. They blocked thoroughfares with barricades made from furniture and corpses, turned sacred pools into defensive moats, and launched suicide attacks from hidden tunnels. The fighting was so fierce that progress was measured in buildings rather than streets. Each structure had to be taken, fortified, and held before the army could advance. The suffering of the civilian population reached biblical proportions. With clean water cut off by the brigantines, people drank from brackish canals contaminated by decomposing bodies. Survivors described parents eating their own children and warriors drinking the blood of the slain to maintain their strength. Yet still they fought on, driven by a mixture of religious fervor and desperate knowledge that surrender meant the end of their civilization. Spanish accounts describe the eerie sound of sacred drums beating through the night, accompanied by the screams of captured soldiers being sacrificed atop the Great Pyramid. Cuauhtémoc proved himself worthy of his warrior ancestry. Leading from the front, He orchestrated a defense that impressed even his enemies. When the Spanish offered terms, thinking the Aztecs must surely break, his response was defiant. "Tell Malinche, Cortés, that we will never surrender. We will either win with honor or die with glory." He ordered the remaining gold thrown into the lake rather than let it fall into Spanish hands, and maintained iron discipline even as his world literally crumbled around him. But by mid-August, the defenders were pushed back to Tlatelolco, the last Aztec stronghold. The great market that had once amazed the Spanish with its abundance was now a nightmare landscape of starving refugees and wounded warriors. On August 13th, during an attempt to break through the Spanish lines by canoe, Cuauhtémoc was captured by a brigantine commanded by Garcia Holguin. His first words to Cortés became legendary. "I have done all in my power to defend my people. I am now reduced to this state. Deal with me as you will." He then touched the conquistador's dagger and asked to be killed. The surrender of Tenochtitlan marked not just the fall of a city, but the death of a civilization. The numbers were staggering. Around 240,000 Aztecs and allies dead from combat, starvation, and disease. Out of the Spanish forces, about 100 had been killed in battle, while thousands of their indigenous allies had fallen. The city itself was almost completely destroyed. 90% of the buildings were reduced to rubble, the canals were choked with debris and bodies, and the lake waters were stained red with blood. Cortés ordered 8 days of celebration, but even his hardened veterans were sobered by the scale of destruction. The Spanish chronicler Bernal Díaz del Castillo captured the bitter victory. "All of us were covered in wounds, and many of our companions were dead." And the smell and the stench of the dead bodies was overpowering. And I say again that I have read the destruction of Jerusalem, but I believe that in this of Mexico, there was much greater mortality. Within years, the Spanish would build their own city atop the ruins, using stones from Aztec temples to construct Catholic churches. As for the protagonists, their fates would be equally dramatic. Cuauhtémoc was initially treated with respect, but was later tortured for information about hidden treasure and eventually executed on suspicion of plotting rebellion. Cortés achieved his dream of fame and legitimacy, but spent his final years fighting lawsuits and dying relatively forgotten in Spain. And La Malinche, whose voice had shaped every major negotiation of the conquest, would become one of Mexican history's most complex and controversial figures, seen as either a founder of a new nation or a symbol of betrayal. The Conquest of Mexico would serve as a template for the broader Spanish conquest of the Americas, but nothing would ever quite match the epic scale of those 93 days when two civilizations fought to the death on a lake of blood and gold. The birth of a new world, the conquest and transformation of Mexico. In the smoking ruins of Tenochtitlan, Cortés faced his greatest challenge yet, building a new society from the ashes of apocalypse. With characteristic audacity, he laid out his vision for a new capital directly atop the Aztec ruins, an act of both practical necessity and symbolic conquest. The first Spanish buildings rose like strange hybrids. Catholic churches built with Aztec stones, still bearing their ancient carvings, while indigenous craftsmen incorporated their traditional designs into European architecture. This architectural fusion became a perfect metaphor for the complex civilization being forged in blood and stone. Mexico City, as the new capital was named, rose with astonishing speed. Cortés employed the same engineering brilliance that had built Tenochtitlan, using indigenous knowledge of the lake system while incorporating Spanish innovations. By 1524, a new metropolitan cathedral was under construction on the site of the Great Pyramid, using its very stones for its foundation. Spanish families moved into homes built on the precise grid pattern of the Aztec city, while surviving indigenous nobles were granted lands and privileges in exchange for helping administrate the new order. Yet beneath this rapid transformation lay deep wounds that would shape Mexican society for centuries. The Spanish encomienda system, initially championed by Cortés himself, evolved into a form of feudalism that kept indigenous populations in virtual slavery. The introduction of European livestock and farming methods forever altered the delicate balance of the valley's ecosystem. Most devastatingly, waves of disease continued to ravage the native population. By 1600, the indigenous population of central Mexico had plummeted from 25 million to barely 1 million. Cortés himself embodied the contradictions of this new world. Named Marqués del Valle de Oaxaca and Captain General of New Spain, he demonstrated remarkable vision in some areas, advocating for education, supporting racial mixing, and fighting for indigenous legal rights. Yet he also participated in the brutal exploitation of native labor and led harsh campaigns against resistant populations. His personal life became equally complex. He married a Spanish noblewoman while maintaining relationships with indigenous women, including La Malinche, with whom he had a son, Martín, one of the first prominent mestizos of the new Mexican society. The conquest's impact rippled far beyond Mexico. The stunning success of a small force in overthrowing the Aztec Empire inspired a wave of conquistadors across the Americas, leading to the rapid conquest of the Inca Empire and other indigenous civilizations. The vast quantities of gold and silver that flowed from Mexico to Spain altered the global economy, fueling both the Spanish Golden Age and rampant inflation across Europe. More subtly, but perhaps more significantly, Mexican crops like corn and chocolate began their worldwide spread, while European wheat, cattle, and horses transformed the American landscape. Today, Mexico City sprawls across the Valley of Mexico, a megalopolis of over 20 million people built atop the filled-in lake where Tenochtitlan once stood. Aztec ruins still emerge from construction sites, ghost cities beneath the modern streets. In the city's great central plaza, the Zócalo, the Metropolitan Cathedral and National Palace stand watch over a space where Aztec priests once performed sacred rites. And in the midst of this architectural palimpsest, archaeologists continue to uncover new chapters of that fateful clash of civilizations, most recently the Temple of Ehecatl, discovered during construction of a shopping mall, its stones still bearing witness to the moment when two worlds collided and a new one was born in fire and blood. The conquest of Mexico remains one of history's most pivotal moments, when the isolation of the Americas ended forever, when the modern global age truly began, and when two sophisticated civilizations confronted each other in a struggle that would reshape the world. Its legacy lives on in the DNA of modern Mexico, in its language, its culture, and in the endless debate over its meaning. Was it, as some argue, the birth of a new nation, or as others contend, the death of an indigenous civilization? Perhaps it was both, a cataclysmic event that, like the volcanoes looming over the Valley of Mexico, both destroyed and created, leaving behind a transformed landscape that continues to shape our world today.